here. Amy Dubbage is here. David Domini's here. Mike Heister's here. Phil Farrington's here. Joshua Herring is on the phone. Ruth, I don't see yet. Who is Ruth? Sarah Mazie, I thought I saw. Oh, okay. Sherry Moore is here. Eugene Organ is here. Susie Lacer, welcome. Franny's here. Kate is here.
Carl will be calling in and just.
Carl's calling in. And so we're missing Ruth right now, and we're waiting for Carl. Did I get everybody? Good, okay. Welcome, everyone. You've got the agenda in front of you. Any comments, thoughts, suggestions? If not, we're gonna keep the agenda as is. Kate?
Just want to say I was appointed to be in charge of telling people to turn their microphones on today. So if you hear me do that, I just want to let you know somebody told me to.
We've got a microphone monitor in the room. Thank you. Is there any testimony, any public testimony, audience participation? Okay, we've taken out 95% of the possibilities right there. Okay. Kate, do you want to remind us about the timeline one more time?
Yep. Thanks everyone for coming to the mid-month meeting. So just a quick timeline is that you all have another meeting in 2 weeks. Ideally, that's when you will finish your prioritized project list. You could finish it today, I'm not sure, but you have that time. And then if you really needed to, you could do it on March 5th as well, when you're also scheduled to meet. So just to have that in mind. And then also to remember that on February 1st, public transportation service providers will be submitting projects for the other 2 pots of funding that we're not talking about right now directly to ODOT. And ODOT will then turn around at some point in February or March and give those projects to you all to review those projects. So, and those will be due back mid-April. So I'm guessing, so go ahead and assume we will have the April meeting for sure. Because that's when those projects, that's my best timeline guess, is that's when
So
they'll come
the
back from
February
ODOT.
meeting is February 5th, according to my calendar.
Yes.
Carl, is that you?
That's me. Hi.
Good. Yeah. Hi.
Sorry I'm late.
Okay, well, we just started. Do you have the date of the April meeting by chance?
April 2nd.
April 2nd?
Nothing.
It could be as early as March, but I'm not sure.
Okay, so that's 3:30. Okay, thanks. So, as you can see from the material that Kate sent to us, we have 14 projects, that's what I counted. And you can see that in the in-district category, there's a little bit of money left, and in the out-of-district, somebody needs to mute, please. In the out-of-district category, we're short some money. So I'd like to start out, let's start with the out-of-district first, since that looks like we may have a challenge there. And keep in mind that when we get done with all this, at some point, we're gonna need to prioritize these projects. So, out-of-district.
Summary sheet.
Say again.
Very last page.
Oh, the summary sheet's the very last page, that's what I'm
Thank you. That's
using
what I
as my
need.
cheat sheet, because it's kind of got them all listed all in one spot.
Good.
Now it's
Thank
easy
you.
to listen.
Yeah. Page 30. So, it's a little unclear to me if some of the folks want to, some of the out-of-district folks want to present again, if you want to tweak what you told us last time, or if you're ready for us to just start general.
Most definitely.
Oh, okay. I heard it most definitely from Ruth. Anybody else in that category want to give us a few words?
And I think Ruth is in district, so.
Oh, okay.
Oh, I'm sorry.
That's okay.
Yes, that's right.
So we're in the out of district right now. So, I guess a first question to ask ourselves is, do we as a committee think that all these projects, are needed, are necessary? I should say that they've already gone through one screen, and that is the Kate Wilson screen. And that screen is, do they meet the minimum criteria as specified by the state? And Kate has told me that she's done that screen and determined that they do meet the criteria. So, I think, setting aside the fact that we're $95,000 short from what is proposed, do we agree that these are needed projects, necessary projects, projects that we could support? Phil?
Thank you. My recollection from last time is that we decided to hold this meeting so that we could get some additional background information. Am I misremembering that somehow?
Well, that was my first initial question.
So I
was
think that the question you're asking is premature. I was expecting that we were going to hear the answers to the questions we raised last time.
Okay. Who has those answers?
So some of them came in your packets, but then if I can get the providers to talk a little bit, that's probably the easiest, to talk about some of the questions that came up. And then I will go ahead and pull up the map for that, what this one was, that shows where these projects are, at least on the west side. As Kelly, if you can talk about your projects in particular, about ridership a little, or about some of the numbers. One of the questions was funding related. And then I'll probably get John Allen to talk a little bit about some of the numbers he sent me earlier today that came to you all today too.
Phil?
Just a question, the project rankings that are listed here with these various projects,
I'm sorry,
just the source of the project rankings that are included on these pages?
that's from the providers themselves.
Okay. So they're priority preferences?
Yes, the providers have already prioritized their own projects.
Okay.
Sherry Moore, and then Eugene.
My question was, do we have minutes from
No, they're recorded. They're not printed.
recorded and not printed?
Yeah, so, for anybody that forgot, you're on TV, or at least you're on camera.
Well, so that was, going back to Phil's comment, I expected that we were going to get, printed minutes, so then I would be able to review what it was we were asking.
What were the questions we had?
Right, so that I could remember,
It's a long time to remember.
yeah, well, several meetings in between.
Eugene and then Ruth.
For my own convenience, since I can't read the documents, could someone read off the list? No details, just the names of the projects?
Yes. We'll do that in a minute. Ruth?
Okay.
I was just gonna reinforce that those questions that were inquiring about additional information, there was a format sent to those providers to fill in, to provide those details. And so this is just an example of what Florence to Yahats and Florence to Eugene did. And a lot of the information, I believe, came up wanting more specifics of funding and what type of service it was and who was the audience and the results. I think that information was packaged in each of the responses.
So, did we receive a copy of those
They were in the packet.
online?
Yeah.
So some of those, so the first one came through with your packet, and then I sent some more today that had come through, and so I have them right here up on the screen. So I knew that we were going to talk about them today a little bit to answer some of your questions.
Mr. Chair, I remember receiving that, and my problem is that the print is so small, I couldn't read any of it. So
Okay. All right.
It wasn't helpful.
Okay, so back to Eugene's question. I'm gonna read the out-of-district funding requests right now. One category is Florence Eugene Public Transportation, and the particular is Florence to Eugene is what it's labeled. Then there's a Florence to Yahat. Then there's a Rhodey Express expansion vehicle. And then there's a Rhodey Express expansion vehicle again. There's a Diamond Express service expansion and a Diamond Express Saturday pilot proposal. So could the people from the service providers for the out-of-district projects remind us of what we asked you last time and tell us what your answers are? And then Sarah, before she starts, go ahead.
So, given that the providers are ranking the projects, am I correct in understanding that LTD is running the first 4 of the out-of-district that are listed here? Florence to Eugene, Florence to Yachats, Rhodey Express, and Rhodey Express?
The first 2 are LCOG projects.
Those are LCOG, so did LCOG rank them Project 11 and then Project 12?
Right.
And
Those
then-
are just numbers that are listed that I sent you guys in your very original packet with all the projects. So those 11, those numbers aren't the ranking that they ranked them.
Where do we have the
So-
ranking again?
The ranking is
It's on page 3.
on each of the individual projects.
Right.
So,
It's on page 3.
so that's, I don't have a list of how they,
So in this, are they in?
they're not ranked, sorry, they're not
They're
ranked
not
in
in
that
prioritized.
spreadsheet. I mean, they're listed by provider they are, but I don't have their, so for instance, LTD's projects are listed as their own rankings. So their projects number 1 through 6 are their own projects.
Right, so what I'm
But-
asking about the out-of-district ones, does LCOG prioritize the Florence Eugene route over the Florence to Yachats route?
Yes,
And then LTD prioritizes the Rhodey Express rolling stock over Rhodey Express service extension?
Yes.
Okay. And Rhodey Express is prioritized over Diamond Express by LTD? Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
That was a good question, thank you for clarifying. Okay, so introduce yourself and tell us your project, and then
Sure.
if you could tell us what the question was and your responses, or what the questions were.
My name is Kelly Clark. I'm a transportation planner with the Lake Council of Governments, and I'm here with 2 projects. As Sarah just mentioned, first is the Eugene to Florence Public Transportation Project. That would be a new service between Eugene and Florence. The second project is taking over the pilot project that's now in place from the Yachats to Florence connector. And that service is projected to, or funding for that service will end at the end of this fiscal year, so June 30th. And so this funding would be able to extend that service and continue it on. So it's not a supplanting, I guess, it's a new service under new funding.
Great.
The question that I was asked particularly, as at the end, was what are the transit options currently on that corridor between Eugene and Florence? And so the handout that I gave shows there's a private transportation option between Coos Bay to Florence, Florence to Eugene, that's run by Pacific Crest. Again, it's a private operator, and rates are a little higher than we would see for a public operator that would have subsidized costs. And the Rhodey Express operates in Florence. There's a couple medical service providers that are in that region. Friends of Florence offers shuttle services for cancer patients receiving radiation treatments between Eugene and Florence. Ride Source, operated by LTD, Medicare and Medicaid rides. There's a Veterans Transportation Service that's operated by Veterans Healthcare Administration. Senior Connections Medical Escort Program. River Cities Taxi operates within Florence. And then there's a travel type of service called Americans Have World Tours and Travel that operates recreational types of excursions between here and Florence. The map that Kate just had up shows the connection. That red line is the connection that we would look at between Eugene and Florence along Highway 126. The blue line is the route between Florence and Yachats. And there's a green line that's maybe a little harder to see, but that connects Florence to Coos Bay. That's not a route that LCOG is proposing to go after or proposing funding for, but it is a route that Coos County Area Transit will be applying for funds for. And so I just wanted to show you that complete network of services, almost treating Florence as a hub or a transit network hub for the coast. And right now they're kind of an isolated community out there. This would really connect Florence with the rest of the county and north and south to transit opportunities that exist. Yachats is connected in with what's called the Northwest Connector, and they're an alliance of transit providers in Northwest Oregon that have kind of seamless service throughout Northwest Oregon, from Yachats to Astoria over to Portland, and all that whole quadrant in between. Wow. And so our eventual goal with this project would be to connect in with that service and again provide a more seamless transition between services.
Thanks. Questions? Phil?
Oh, go ahead.
Oh, I was looking at the feasibility study
Yes.
that I got this morning. Thank you for sending it.
Absolutely.
And it looked like, I was looking at all the responses on the survey. What I didn't see from the tribes was, and tell me what you heard, is whether or not the tribes would be able to use this for their employees. I mean, did they
for
think
the-
that employees would use this route from Eugene to Florence? Or maybe, would it be better, is it the Yachats to Florence that would serve their employees possibly?
Are you talking specifically for the casino?
For the casino,
Yeah,
right.
The casino, and actually that's one service that I failed to mention. The casino does offer a free shuttle between Springfield to Eugene to Bonita and then to the casino, for the express purpose of trying to get people to the casino to recreate there. The tribe, I think, is interested in thinking, they've been an active member in this feasibility study that you mentioned. I think getting their members to and from for commute purposes is a big service that this would provide. It would also, if we connected in with the Coos Bay service, that's where their boundary extends to.
For the tribal?
Yeah,
Okay.
the tribal boundary extends to Coos Bay, and so it's really having that complete network that they're really interested in. Their members are looking for access to medical services both in the Eugene-Springfield area and in the Coos Bay area where their tribal headquarters are. And so it's providing that complete network of services that they're really looking at.
Once this is up and running, do they think that this service might supplant their service?
They haven't mentioned that, you mean the shuttle, the casino
Yeah, the
shuttle?
shuttle,
They haven't expressly said that.
Okay.
And that shuttle does run solely on casino funds, and so
Okay.
that's its independent source of funding.
But that's something we can, maybe could be negotiated in the future perhaps.
Yeah, the tribe may have a bus that we can use, or looking at some match opportunities that we can leverage. So they are an active participant in being involved.
Great, thanks.
And the same with, again, the Coos Bay to Florence route. Those are two, I think, key routes for the tribe and their membership.
Great, thank you.
Phil?
Yeah, you showed those other sources that included the Friends of Florence for their ride for oncology patients.
Yes.
Was the thought, and do the numbers here in the project assume that that would be supplanted and people would be riding this service instead of that provided by Friends of Florence?
I think that's something that we would have to tease out through the pilot study to see if that is something that could be supplanted or if that's a special niche kind of need that wouldn't be able to be supplanted.
Yeah, I think if memory serves, and I think there have been efforts maybe of trying to, or conversations maybe about dialing in with other LTD services or getting them to a point and then getting them on standard transit somewhere. But I think given the nature of the patients that are using this service, sometimes people are ill. And maybe mixing different communities of people, that may not be a good match.
That may not be. There's, well, we've heard through that feasibility study that there's a big need for medical transportation, medical related
see that.
transportation between Eugene and Florence. There's not the wealth of services there that there is here. People are trying to make that commute and don't have as many options. And so we're really trying to target that audience as much as any other audience.
Sure.
Yeah, David?
I just wanted to understand the numbers as I'm looking at this. So you're looking for $40,000 of STIF funds, and that's going to be commingled with another $645,000 of additional funds from state and, am I reading that right?
Right, so there's this, the STIF funding has kind of the two pots. This is the formula funding pot. Then there's the state discretionary funds that Kate mentioned earlier, and that is a competitive pot statewide. And one of the kind of the categories as inter-community services. And so that's what these two routes would fall
Have
under.
those dollars been allocated at the state level yet?
No, it's just it's a competitive pot of money that,
Okay, so you're really, so this project is looking for about 8% funding.
well, this
I'm just trying to understand the
would be-
dollars.
This would be used as match. This funding's, formula funds do not require a match for them, they're just kind of you get what you get. The discretionary funds require a 10% match, since we are serving rural Oregonians as a 10% match. And so for whatever dollar amount that we ask for, we have to come up with 10% of our own dollars to match, and so that's what this would be used for.
Okay.
And then I think one more question that I
Go
know
ahead.
I was asked is what what a cutaway bus looks like.
Yeah.
And so there's a picture down here of what the Florence to Yachats connector bus is and looks like.
And this is what it would continue to look like?
That's
and
what we
the-
would, that's our, right now that ODOT purchased the bus, I believe, and it has it under, it has the current title, and so we would have to transfer that, use of that bus for this route.
For Eugene as well?
Oh, no, sorry, it would be just for the Yachats to Florence portion of it.
Eugene would have a full size.
Eugene would have either a full-size or cutaways as well. Well, for the Eugene to Florence, sorry if I'm confusing you, so Eugene to Florence, LCOG, well, for both of these routes, LCOG would go out, issue a request for proposal to have a contracting operator come in and provide the service, and LCOG would manage the service. And so we would work with that provider and depend on if that provider would help us determine what kind of bus to use.
Amy?
If the other sources of funding don't come through, would you cancel the project or scale it back? What would your approach be?
Well, these are basically our two opportunities for
Yeah.
funding, we would have to wait the next round of STIF funding to go after these funds to make the projects work. So that'd be 2 years out.
So what would, the money would go where, Kate?
Like if we said that if we decide to award the project funds, but you didn't get the match fund, or, the
Oh,
other
I see what you're
required
saying.
funds, would you scale back the project
Yeah.
using the funds that you did, that
We
you
do
were
have,
awarded?
yeah,
Okay.
we do have some scalability
Okay.
for service, our goal is to provide service 7 days a week, at least 2 round trips a day, Monday and evening, potentially 1 midday, which likely would be 4 days a week, because we want to connect again with what the Yachats, or Florence to Coos Bay is doing. But, we would have to start scaling back service depending on the funds that we would be granted.
So you would use the money that's available, but scale down the
Right.
service, I see.
Right.
Other questions? So that was one set of out-of-district proposals, then it looks like, I think maybe the only question on the vehicle was what does a cutaway look like? Does anybody remember if there were other questions on the vehicle purchases?
I think there are questions about looking at alternative fuel vehicles in the future. That question came up.
That could be an outcome of the pilot, that will be a goal. I like that. Yeah, we always want to have what are our measurable objectives, and maybe that's one of them.
Could I expand on that?
Go right ahead.
Just a little bit. I'm a bit confused about where this committee fits into what I'm about to say. But we're faced with an emergency of global proportions having to do with carbon emissions. Everybody has to be planning for how they're going to end carbon emissions. And the sooner any particular group can do it without a complete disruption of whatever it is they're trying to do otherwise, the better, because other people are going to take longer. When we talk about adding service or extending service, one of the questions that occurs to me is, what kind of equipment do you already have? What is its likely lifespan? At what point can you transfer from diesel or gasoline powered equipment to equipment that runs on either renewable liquid fuels or on electricity, or maybe on fuel cells. That seems to me a long way off. Because that may have an influence on whether you want to do the service with the equipment that you have. And let me just give you an example of what I mean. If, for example, you have a bus like the one in the picture there, and it's been around for a few years, and it's going to be useful for a few years more, that's a fine situation to be in, because it's going to take a while to do the transition anyway. If you're talking about buying new equipment that's going to last, to pull a number out of the hat, 20 years, then that's a problem, because you're going to have to stop using that equipment after 10 years because of the climate change issue. And unless there's some consideration of those kinds of issues as we do it, then we're actually working against one set of issues, which is how do we get our transportation cleaned up, against the other set of issues, which we're really focused on here, which is how do we extend transit in a way that actually makes it usable for people in the meantime. I don't know how to reconcile those issues, but I haven't heard any conversation except the question that just got asked about the cleaning up part. And it's absolutely critical, because we only have 10 years. The IPCC report makes that clear. So I think any decisions that the board makes and any decision made by the administration has got to consider how you're going to transition away from fossil fueled vehicles to either to a system in which you replace the fossil fuel with renewable fuel, or replace the drivetrain with something that is energized by renewable electricity or something of that sort. So I'm putting lots of words in your mouth. I'm hoping that we're on the same page, more or less.
Yeah, I think you asked the question last time
Yeah.
also, which is why I brought it up.
Yeah. So I think one of the things that I'd like to know about is what the state of the equipment, what you're going to have to buy new, and what the plan is for transitioning within 10 years to 100% renewable systems. And I hate to put it that way, but the fact is that the state government and the federal government, and as far as I can tell, the local governments aren't even asking the right question yet. And it's a critical question for us to ask.
Ruth?
I'd like to put some reality to that. It's a question I've been asking, being in a rural community, who's going to repair it? Who's going to maintenance it? And how are we going to get that fuel source? And so I see it more as a partnership and a collaborative effect, because there's no point in having something that you can't fully implement and support in that outlier type scenario. And so that's a good question, because we
Every bit of that's
can't go
true.
there.
Yeah, that's right.
Sarah?
Well, is LTD not a resource in that realm?
I'm a private nonprofit, and I would have to bring my vehicles up to their maintenance shop, and so that's not always practical.
And could I just respond to that very, very briefly? Those are fabulous questions. They're critical questions. They've got to be answerable. And if you don't start asking them immediately, the 10 years goes by and you're in the same boat and the weather's worse.
Yeah, I've tried, just as a quick, there have been attempts on my part to try and piggyback with the city's resources and other agencies to try and see if there was a way to get into the renewable window of opportunity. And usually there's barriers at this point,
Right.
so.
I don't know which order these hands came up in, do you?
I was just gonna respond to the question about LTD being a resource.
Oh, okay.
So currently, we have a person who is dedicated to creating a sustainability plan for our fleet and fleet replacement over time. And one of the things that we've been doing is working with a specific company on our electric buses, and so it's proprietary. So if I'm wrong, tell me, Mark. Our people will be trained very specifically on these buses and how they function, and we'll have someone who's available for us from BYD to help us with the buses until they're ready to go, and then it's kind of up to us at that point. So part of like looking at that, if we were to hope for an electric fleet, maybe the distance between Eugene and Florence might be too long to be able to run sustainably an electric vehicle. But also, I don't believe that, and I have no idea, but I don't think BYD has this size of a bus. And it would have to be if we were to use LTD as resources for that electric vehicle. Beyond that, like if we're looking at other renewable sources, I think that most places who sell, like it would be a hybrid or it would be a, another kind of vehicle.
Natural gas.
A natural, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, and I could go on this way on, Sarah, and we are doing, Kelly Hale is kind of really overseeing our sustainability program, so she's currently doing a carbon analysis for LTD. So we really kind of understand where we're at, and then we'll come to the board and we'll put together a sustainability plan with goals and things over the next 10 years or whatever to decide, okay, what propulsion systems do we need to go to? How do we need to get there? Is there stopgap things we should do in the meantime? Our whole paratransit fleet is still all gasoline. We need to take a look at that and try to understand, okay, what makes sense, in terms of, getting to, a cleaner, more efficient propulsion system. So it's in process, but 10 years, I don't know.
And I'd say that paratransit fleet would be the closest thing to this. And so since we haven't begun to look at that quite yet, because we're still working on our rolling stock for buses, it's hard to tell if we could be useful or not in that area.
Sherry Moore.
So I agree with you, Phil, but I feel like unless the state sets some of the criteria as being that we, look at renewable resources or, I don't see that as being a part of this committee's, when we expend the funds, it's not something that I agree, in the future, but at this point in time, that's not part of the criteria that the projects had to come under, I don't believe. So,
What about criteria D? I'm just looking at that. Can you, Kate, tell us?
Criteria D is for the buses that are powered by natural gas, electricity, or other low or no emissions propulsion for use in areas with populations of 200,000 or more.
So it's that 200,000 or more part that
okay.
when you get to Florence, it starts to.
But I think that maybe the point would be that the agencies would be responsible for submitting those projects to fit within this, that it's not necessarily our job to
Right.
fit their projects within this.
So that would bring up then this Rhodey Express rolling stock, although again, it's not serving the 200,000 population, but it is the request for a new vehicle.
So what's the life expectancy of a cutaway?
7 years.
Oh, so no problem. Tom Schwetz.
I was just gonna say,
It'll wear out just in time, Phil.
ODOT is not in the room, I don't see you today.
I'm here.
Franny's
Me.
here. Sorry, Franny.
I know, I feel like
You're
I'm
just
one
part
of
of the
yours,
gang.
I know.
But I was gonna say, think about statewide, how much application this size of bus is gonna have on various county transportation solutions. And I guess the concept we've kind of batted around is whether ODOT might look at a state level procurement of those buses that would rather than going through LTD or someone else, that there's so many places where they're gonna wanna have something like that seems like a way to think about it strategically.
So let me try to summarize what I think just happened. Phil pointed out that if we buy a new vehicle that has a long lifespan, that we could be throwing away half of the value, or the value of half of that vehicle. Because within 10 years, it's gonna have to comply with alternative fuel. But we just found out that it falls within the lifespan, so it may wear out at just about the right time. Does that do anything to the LCOG proposal, or does that just confirm that you'd like to leave it just as it is?
Confirms that we'd like to leave it as is.
All right.
I think, this is an important project to connect 2 communities, 3 communities, 4 communities, if we look at the whole network that we're trying to create here, and to really enhance the statewide transit network and reach those goals. Has the opportunity to serve some high percentage of low-income households and work on our partnerships with other transit agencies to the north and south of us. And so I think, thinking about it from more of a partnership and collaboration and reduction of fragmentation from services and connecting of communities, I think those are the goals that we're really trying to achieve with this project.
So as we learn more from this project, then
These 2 projects.
yeah, then as other rounds of funding come up, we can insert the urgency that Phil has brought to our attention.
And we'll have a lot of lessons learned, and we'll be watching closely with other transit agencies, particularly LTD, and what they're doing with their renewable sources and more fuel-efficient vehicles. And be, again, a partner with that as they move forward too, because connections with their services will be really important to us.
Okay, I have Eugene, and then I'm not sure who was next. I'll just say Eugene, Sarah, Kate, and Sherry.
Okay, my first question was, is it going to be accessible?
Yes.
And secondly, I'm thinking, why can't we be a leader in terms of climate change and battling that, instead of waiting to see what the state does or other people do? It just seems to me like it's important enough that it ought to be addressed.
And I do think LTD is taking a really strong lead on some of these fuel-efficient vehicles, and we, as LCOG, have the opportunity to be a part of that.
Tom, I'm sorry, you were waving.
Out some wisdom, so it's I hope, in my judgment. So the issue for me in terms of this new technology is that, as particularly as a small agency, and that's why I reference the state, because they're a big agency, is that we want to stay off the bleeding edge of this. We're already experiencing some delays in getting our own vehicles ready to go. And I'm just saying that's the virtue of having a large agency like the state helping figure this out.
Yeah.
Maybe go out a little bit further.
Cutting edge, okay, bleeding edge, not so much. Okay. Sarah, were you next?
Yeah, I think so. I totally agree with Eugene and with Phil, and I like the idea of the state going ahead and making a big purchase of electric vehicles or whatever it might be. And I just want to say that the reason, I'm in the transportation department in 4J, over on the mechanics side. I'm as the Safe Routes to School coordinator, I'm not involved with it, so I don't know the details of it, but I brought that up, what I mentioned about can LTD be a resource, because a lot of other entities bring in their vehicles to 4J for repairs. And so, I think we will have to, in this transition, we are going to have to come together, and where there are resources in terms of expertise, there is gonna have to be some awkwardness probably, and bringing vehicles to a different community, but
Break down the silos.
yeah, we're just gonna have to, and we can't wait for 10 years to do something because we're already having problems, so.
And I appreciate that. I think one of the things that we found through this feasibility study for the Florence to Eugene route was that no one agency is really equipped to do this all on their own, and so it is, how do we work together, how do we partner, how do we support each other in our efforts, and I think we can continue to do that as this gets implemented and as we learn more.
So this in and of itself is an exercise in collaboration.
Yeah.
So I've got Kate, Sherry, then Eugene.
I was just gonna say, the word I was looking for was CNG, or the acronym, I should say.
Yeah.
And there are CNG buses that are, well, the size that was up there on the screen a moment ago. So it would be interesting to see if the state could look at procuring a number of those, for the rural services that will be. Or, I mean, the other piece of this is, and when you talk to people from all sorts of different areas of the state, CNG is not necessarily widely received as of yet. And there are many reasons for that. So it'll be interesting to see as it emerges, I think, in the legislature, what the rules may be that come down for the climate and invest or whatever it looks like.
So those letters stand for?
Compressed natural gas.
Yeah.
So, and I know that there's compressed natural gas service stations in Eugene, but I don't know about Florence for refilling. I'm guessing not.
And just to add the CNG dilemma, of course, it's still a fossil fuel.
Right, yeah.
And which is the biggest issue, although it's a plentiful and reasonably priced fossil fuel, it's still fossil fuel. And so, and Eugene's actually looking at taxing natural gas because of that. And so, you know, we're trying to, as we're looking at all of the options, and there are renewable CNG now that's available, and they're creating that out of dumps and
Cattle farms.
Poops.
yeah, waste, yeah, and human waste and whatnot. And, you know, there's some promise there, but it's, you know, like such a small percentage. I mean, basically feed it into the grid like they do wind power, you know, it's still, you know, on the grid. So it's, you know, I don't know the answer on CNG yet. So, but we're looking at it, that'll be part of the analysis that we do. Yeah.
Sherry, then Eugene.
I'm just gonna say that by the virtue of being public transportation, we are helping eliminate so many, you know, individual automobile cars, hopefully, that would be making those same routes. So there is a plus to what this whole, I applaud the state for this funding and making this money available to public transportation for outlying areas. And I do have another meeting this evening, so I was just concerned about that as well.
Eugene.
What would be the cost of the ride to the individual rider?
Bingo.
Is it gonna be the same as it would be in city?
It probably will be a little bit more, but we haven't come to a final number, but around $5 to $8 is what we're looking at.
Round trip.
Mm-hmm. And that's consistent with a lot of the intercommunity routes that we're seeing statewide. Through this just to give a little more background, through the feasibility study for the Eugene to Florence project, we contacted a lot of the intercommunity providers around the state just to talk about what are their lessons learned and how do they operate, how are they funded. And a lot of them do have a little bit of a higher fee structure for their intercommunity routes than they do for internal operations, but it's not substantially higher, so that's what we're looking at.
Would I be able to use my golden pass or whatever it is I have?
That's actually another question that we had through the survey. We had a lot of people ask us, you know, will there be a golden pass type of opportunity? And so we'll look at that too through our fee structure. Yeah.
Josh on the phone, any questions, comments? Both.
Not really. I mean, the discussion that, or the comment that Sherry made, I think is spot on as far as, you know, with these routes, we're trying to cut down on the number of vehicles making the trips, and that, you know, diesel manufacturers are pushing constantly to have more efficient engines, and I think any bus that LTD's bought in the last year is hands down more efficient, cleaner burning diesel than, you know, one that's even 5 years older than that. There's a lot of stuff with the sulfur content in the diesel and the urea burning off in the exhaust system. So I think there's a lot there. I think as far as electric goes, I don't like what Ruth said, I don't know if I'm comfortable in a rural area because it's a little inconsistent and, yeah, the service would be hard to do. But, yeah, I mean, I think our vehicles are going to fall inside the deadline, so I think we're okay.
Thanks, Josh. Carl, anything? If you're talking, Carl, you're on.
All right, to get off you. Sorry, nothing for me, thanks.
Okay, Kate?
Just one thing, Kelly, when you're looking at passes, will you also look at youth fair in that? Because I know that that's one of our priorities that we're putting on for LTD at least.
And just as a reminder in my response just earlier, this will be an LCOG managed route, not an LTD
Right.
route. So we'll have to look at what kind of, if there are any partnerships for honoring those types of routes or something like that. And
Cool.
we'll have to work through that and potential youth houses as well.
Awesome.
Again, those are packages that we see a lot throughout the state, and
Yeah.
so we'd look if we could emulate some of that.
Yeah, and I think the way that it would be different for youth is that what we're looking at is not necessarily having a pass, but it would be youth 18 and under, free ride for the school year to begin with. So they wouldn't necessarily have something to show other than their face.
Eugene?
I'm sorry, I just thought of this. Federal law requires a paratransit service within a quarter mile, half mile, either side of a fixed route. What happens with that situation where you've got a fixed route running from Eugene to Florence?
So I don't know.
It's a different definition.
So the 3/4 mile requirement is in a city area. And right now in Florence, we already have ADA, complimentary ADA service to the.
I couldn't hear, I'm sorry.
I'm sorry, Eugene. The 3/4 mile requirement for ADA service does not apply to the transportation between the cities. What it applies to is within the cities. So as long as we're providing ADA service within 3/4 mile of it, while it's in Eugene and Springfield in our metro area, and we also already have an ADA service, a complimentary ADA service within Florence.
Okay, that was my next question.
Yes,
So the Rodeo Express has that?
it does, yes, it does.
Okay.
Thank you, Cosette. David?
Would that be a concern if we added a stop in Mapleton on this route?
And then, just to reiterate, ADA provision on the bus will be paramount to having a contractor in place, and so that would be an absolute requirement.
So as I'm looking at page 30, it looks to me like there are two more projects where there might be questions. That would be the Diamond Express service expansion and the Diamond Express Saturday pilot. Is that you, Cosette? I don't remember who that is.
So I'm going to ask John to do it. John was not here last.
All right. So this is John Allen?
So you can go on.
You can sit right here if you want, John. Carl's on the phone.
So first of all, then, I guess, I don't know who knows what the questions were that were asked last week, because we don't have the printed minutes.
They're right here.
Okay,
So
thanks,
you can
Kate.
talk, Janice, you can talk a little bit about the things that you sent me, and I'll pull up the map of them, but really you want to know the importance, the ridership of the Diamond Express before the years that both were operated, and then a little bit more about how they're each funded right now. I think were the ones that I wrote down that were the key ones, and then what the route looks like, I can get the, I'll pull up the map.
I will, I'm pulling that up now. So the Diamond Express service, we're looking to potentially expand a fourth trip onto the service, as well as start a pilot project to expand service into Saturdays. The current Diamond Express service is a service between the communities of Oak Ridge and the metro area here. So it's an intercity service. It connects residents in the Oak Ridge and West Fork communities with transportation options in our metro area. So that's train, air, local bus service, as well as connecting community members with services such as hospitals, education, other things that otherwise the communities in Oak Ridge would be isolated from without a transportation option. So the funding for that historically for the core service has been through the STF and 5311F grant processes. So STF not to be confused with the STIF process. So the core funding is a intercity discretionary grant, which is competitive. It's federal funds known as 5311F, which is typically matched with state special transportation funds. And then we also receive a contribution from the city of Oak Ridge. And then we also receive fare box revenues for the service. So it costs $2.50 for a trip. The service itself provides typically over 12,000 rides per year. And every month we'll typically be driving over 5,000 miles as part of the service because there's a significant amount of travel time between Oak Ridge and Eugene. We're currently providing 3 daily weekday round trips.
Oh, okay. Were you talking roadie and diamond?
Oh, I can also do the same for Roadie Express if the committee would like.
That's probably a good idea.
Great. So for the Roadie Express, it is fundamentally different from the way that we're providing service for Diamond Express. So for our Roadie Express, this is a fixed route service within the community of Florence. So this is not connecting other cities as the Diamond Express service does. This is doing 2 loops in the city of Florence. So you can see we've got a map up on the screen and it shows that there is a north loop and a south loop which connect in the middle at the grocery outlet in the middle of Florence. And so on the north side, it goes all the way up through Fred Meyer, and on the south loop, it goes through Old Town and connects the casino. These services are funded differently. So the Roadie Express is primarily funded through a federal 5311 formula grant. So this is a rural area grant. It is not competitive. It's based on population and ridership for rural communities under 50,000 people. However, it is similarly matched using state special transportation funds. It is also similarly receives a contribution through the local city of Florence, and it also receives fare box revenue. It is $1 per trip on Roadie Express. We provide over 10,000 fixed route rides per year, and that means roughly 2,000 miles or a little bit over 2,000 miles driven every month on average. Over half of all these trips serves older adults. And as was mentioned previously, we also provide complimentary ADA paratransit service as is required for any fixed route service in the Florence area. And that's a 3/4 mile boundary outside of our fixed route service. We're currently contracting with River Cities Taxi for our Roadie Express service. We're currently contracting with Pacific Crest Bus Lines for our Diamond Express service.
So, John, on the Florence in-town service, is LCC one of the stops on that route? The LCC campus?
We go,
Is it? Okay.
Yeah, we do have a flag stop there.
Yeah.
Great, thanks. I think before we do questions, I want to introduce Susie as a new member of our committee. Since we're halfway through our meeting. Welcome.
Thank you.
And I can't remember who you are replacing, what?
Josh.
Oh, Josh. Oh, okay, yeah. Well, welcome, we're glad you're here.
Thank you.
Okay, now, are there questions from John's presentation? Yes, Eugene.
Is the Roadie Express successful?
yes, so all LTD services and vehicles that we use for our services are accessible to the public.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions, Sherry?
So I said, so for the Diamond Express service expansion, 25,000, is that the request?
That's correct.
That seems like a small amount of money, so are you assuming then it will be matched with some other funds, or?
No, that is the cost to provide the additional portion of the service. So we're currently providing trips throughout the day, and so essentially what we'd be adding is a trip in the middle of the day. And so we currently have our administrative overhead costs are already covered. The costs of starting and ending the service are covered. We wouldn't be changing staffing levels. All we would be doing is adding one additional trip right in the middle of the day between that service. And so essentially the majority of the costs that we need to be able to provide that extra trip are fuel.
Great,
Diamond Express.
thanks. Yeah, David?
On both of these, on both the Diamond and the Roadie, what kind of, and I don't know the technical term used, what kind of density are we, I mean, if we're running a bus that carries 50 people, are we typically carrying 20 on that bus? What kind of again, I'm not sure the right word to use, but what kind of
Productivity, maybe.
Yes.
density, usage?
That's a great
How many
question.
empty seats do we have?
Yeah, that's a great question. So that can vary considerably based on the time of year and time of day. And so in particular for our Roadie Express service, we'll notice a significant increase during the summer months when it's very nice. For Diamond Express service, where we're seeing more commuters, we'll see a majority of our traffic on our first and last trip of the day. So the midday trips are the least frequent. That's where we would anticipate seeing the least frequent ridership. Whereas for Roadie Express, we would see typically in the winter months our least frequent ridership. I did mention our overall ridership for the year, which is essentially gives us an average. For Diamond Express service, we do have very full buses for our first and last trips. For Roadie Express service, it can be more sporadic based on events, time of year. Typically, for both services, we have a core foundation of ridership that sees this as a lifeline. So in the community of Oak Ridge, we in particular have a disproportionate number of residents who identify as either low income or as older adults, and this is their main transportation connection to other options within the metro area. Within the city of Florence, we have a large retirement community who rely on public transportation to be able to get around town, both for shopping, medical care, to be able to provide transportation throughout the community. So we do have both some core ridership for both services, but there are going to be either times of day or times of year where ridership is lower.
We have an average per day.
I don't have that in front of me, but I could bring that for the community, for the committee.
Thanks. Other questions? So now I believe that we have all of the out-of-district projects before us. I guess the question in my head is, between the providers, do you see an obvious or easy solution to the $95,000 gap?
Good question.
That's a good question.
I think it might be more than 95,000. I'm looking
I
at
said, where are you
the,
finding the gap?
yeah, the
Oh, maybe
project
I did
number
the arithmetic
11
wrong.
is $80,000.
Well, that's better.
Us, right? So we have a gap of, if my math is right, 111,000.
Which
Oh, I
is,
see.
That's
You're
what we're wrong.
looking at the total over 2 years. Are you looking at the 808 minus the 713?
That's what I was looking.
Yeah, okay.
I could be wrong, but
Well, we've got a gap. The providers,
I see.
you know, I guess you can figure this out, or you can leave it up to this committee of folks to prioritize it. And you probably are closer to the solution, or to the best solution than we might be. Phil?
Well, am I to assume if the provider, LTD, has already given their proposed priority to the first two projects, 7 and 8, the Roadie Express, I think Cosette made a very compelling argument when she presented this originally, that the need for this new rolling stock that's going to be needed to maintain the service. I mean, that's fundamental, regardless of how it's powered. But so it seems to me that they've already expressed that they prefer funding the Roadie Express projects over the Diamond Express projects. The Roadie Express projects also leverage other funds, if I'm not mistaken, from other sources. And if you can just even see kind of the number of criteria that, stiff criteria that are met, there's more of them, I guess, on the Florence projects than of the others. So if I were to make a recommendation, it would be to, sorry, but I would probably say if it didn't make the cut, then I would probably say that the two Oak Ridge Diamond Express projects would be the ones I would recommend fall by the wayside.
Thanks, that's helpful. I don't know if the right ODOT person is in the room, but in the, if you look at the in-district, there's a little bit more money than what has been proposed. And of course, it did occur to me that, to ask the question if that money might be able to be moved to the out-of-district category. Kate, you have your hand.
Yeah, I wanna mention one other thing, really quick, especially when we're talking about out of district, we talked about this a long time ago, but one of the things that you all are required to do as a starting point is look at where the funding came from. You think about how to divide it up between the county. So, we reached out to the public transportation service providers at Preston County and talked about this. And so this is the outside of the district breakout of how the employee payroll tax is generated. And so, again, this is very rough estimates, but you can see that about, we divided it out by the county commissioner districts. And so you're not required to go by these guidelines, you don't have to spend X amount of money per county commissioner district, but this is your starting point when you're thinking about spending out of district funds. So right now, about 62% of those funds are generated in the west. The requests from the providers are for about 88% of the funds. So just to also keep that in mind when you're thinking, again, this is just kind of your starting place to say we've allocated the funding based on where that money is generated from employers. That's an added up.
Being an algorithm. Sherry, then Kate.
Well, so does that answer the question about whether or not we cannot move the funds into the out of district that are in the in district, yeah?
Because it's a starting point, so you're not strictly tied to boundaries. It's a little, the in and out of district is a little bit more confusing because these rules are written primarily for counties where it's not a mass transit district that's operating it. The in and out of district boundaries don't exist in very many places.
Tom Schwartz can add some clarity.
I have perspective. So, speaking as an interest. No, really what happened, and the reason that you see that not all the funds were allocated to grants is because our due date to submit to LCOG was the 20th of December. I want to say it might have been the 19th or 20th when ODOT updated what their 100% level was by about $278,000 in our area. And keep in mind that we have a 130% project list.
Right.
That's the first place we go to spend out. If we get more, that's the idea. If we get more than the 100%.
I see.
Then we draw from it.
So it's not necessarily available money.
Correct.
Kate?
Right, and I was gonna add on to that in the 130% project list for out of district, there's a $100,000 project and a $106,000 project. And so if we're looking at prioritization, we would be able to pay for all of the ones in the 100% list if we get over the 100%. And not have to cut any of them, but maybe not do the ones in the 130%.
Well, it's 278 in district that we didn't allocate. There's 95,000 over on the out.
Oh, even with the 130% list?
Well, I don't know about that.
I might look, this total say a 100% funding request, not 130%.
Yeah, so the 100% funding request right now for out of district is 808,000.
Right.
But the, but the 100% that you have right now is 713,000. So for the out of district, it only increased by $24,000. So that from what the ODOT's original estimates were to what their December estimates are. So you at your 100% level right now, usually it's 100% less. So you have requests at the 100% level for $95,000 more.
Okay.
So, yeah, so I think like the first thing I would recommend to staff is that you all kind of discuss these projects and decide if you think they're worthy.
Okay, that was my initial question. So I'll go back to that. We've reposed the questions, we've answered the questions, had discussion. So now the broad question is, of the out-of-district projects, do we think that they're all worthy of funding? Knowing that Kate has put the screen of do they meet the state criteria, and she's determined that they do. Sarah?
If I understood correctly, the Oak Ridge Diamond Express, we'd be adding a midday route, and the midday routes are already not particularly, or the current midday route is not very highly used. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, so, but that's still a priority over Saturday. You think that midday route would get more usage than a Saturday route would?
So there's currently 3 trips on the Diamond Express, and our experience has been that the first and last trip is the most heavily used, so those tend to be fairly busy commuter trips. Midday trips still have ridership, just not at those same service levels. Expanding to a 4th midday trip, I think, would have consistent ridership, though not as strong as our first and last trips. Expanding to Saturday service would be a new type of service. So that would be looking at expanding into, say, potential tourism, other kinds of transit that we may not be capturing through our weekday trips. It would be a new type of service, so we would put that forward as a pilot project rather than true service expansion with the intention of continued funding. So we'd look to evaluate service levels based on and continued funding requests based on ridership, whereas a midday trip we think could be sustainable.
Phil?
Yeah, just, and this is a more general question. My recollection from looking at this very cursorily is that when you increase frequency, you're likely to increase ridership just because more people are willing to consider riding the bus than would have considered it before. And some of the people in the next row can probably comment on that question. But I'm wondering what your thoughts are if you were to add that extra trip in the middle of the day, if that has an effect of moving people into the system, into the service, who might not use it at all otherwise.
I think that could.
And this goes to that row too, this question.
I think that absolutely would also be a great service planning question. I think that would be a fortunate positive impact of increased frequencies that we could potentially capture other riders, or for those that either the first or last trip may not potentially meet their needs, or if someone comes in and they have, say, a different type of trip than a commuter trip, so they have an appointment in the morning or afternoon that may better meet their needs than having just potentially 2 trips, and to give people some more options and to potentially capture additional riders that may not currently be using the service. So absolutely.
Yeah, and urban standards and rural standards are different.
Yeah.
You know, if we increase the frequency in Eugene, Springfield, yeah, we more ridership, but limited ridership opportunities really up there in the rural services is long. It's, an hour and a half round trip or 2 hours, and so it may bring more people, but it wouldn't be significant.
Okay.
I've got Ruth and Kate.
What it could potentially do is it allows those folks who have to wait for that last trip, they may prefer an earlier opportunity. And so we've experienced that from the audience that is going to and from Cottage Grove. So it may split the difference, but rider satisfaction may go up, and also their willingness to take the earlier trips in order to have a round trip that better fits their schedule.
Kate, Tom, did you want to comment on
Could I
that?
ask for clarification? Phil, were you talking about the Rhodey Express midday trip? Or?
Diamond.
We were specifically talking about Diamond.
Okay.
But I think we just heard that, that in town, when you increase frequency, you're gonna get more people to ride the bus. And I think the immediate comment after that was, in the rural area, it doesn't work that way. Did I get that right?
Yeah, you wouldn't get as many.
Yeah.
You might increase a few, but
Yeah.
it wouldn't be 100. It might be
I
10.
mean, I'd be a very strong supporter of increasing service if you could get people out of their cars and onto the bus, regardless of where it is.
Kate?
I did want to say that on page 23 and 24 of our packet here, it does give you the number of rides as an outcome for each of these service expansions. So for the 4th trip, it's 2,400 rides annually, estimated outcome. And then for the Saturday pilot, it is 500 rides annually predicted outbound. So just when we're looking at,
Gotcha.
Phil Farrington.
So I'd just like to ask the committee, given that there's a shortfall from funding all of this, would you prefer more of the peanut butter approach of, funding something on the east side, funding one of either the Rodeo Express or the LCOG projects that are Florence related or Eugenia Florence? Or would you prefer to go with an approach that to me would seem to maximize the leveraging of funds and the greatest benefit? So I'll just put it out to you that way, if it makes a difference.
Which is what?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I would think that.
Describe the last thing.
If you fund the Diamond Express, it's the peanut butter approach. You try to serve as much of the geographic area as you can, although perhaps it doesn't have the greatest impact, other than obviously the people who are riding it, it would be a huge impact. The greatest number of people for the greatest amount of money that we have available to spend.
Could I respond to that in a slightly different way?
Yes.
I mean, I look at numbers, Project 7 and Project 8, which I think are the what are we talking about? The vehicles. There is no match money in either of those, at least according to this.
Just
But
for 7, there's no matching funds.
is there for 8? Did I miss that?
Oh, I'm sorry, no, you're correct.
But on the other hand, you can't take some of it away because this is a unit. This is a unit. You've got to pay the whole price for the bus. You can't buy half of it.
Right.
Yeah.
So you're sort of stuck with this. If you're going to buy the bus, you got to buy the bus.
Yeah.
Sarah.
What, Kate had her hand up.
Okay, Kate.
well, I'm just wondering if there's any way to adapt the Project 8
That was my question.
just to have 2 hours more service. If that would, like, what would the impact on the total be? Because we're looking at that having $489,000 of our ask. And so if there's a way to maybe amend that to not be the full 3 hours, I don't know if that's useful or not, but it might be able to give us more of the other things.
So I was wrong.
Yeah, or if we could just take the budget gap out of that project and whatever way makes sense.
1.5 hours? I don't know.
Because then we could still serve the whole region that's paying into this one.
So I don't think I'm gonna ask the committee to vote on this today, but I will ask for like a thumbs up, thumbs down, kind of informal, where does the committee stand? So that the providers can get a sense of where we are on this question of number 8, the $95,000 gap coming out of that particular. Cosette, did you want to say something?
Yeah, I just wanted to let you know that we could take another look at the Rodeo Express expansion service. So it includes adding hours. It also includes adding frequency. So we could take a look at that, another look at that, and
Okay.
come back to you with
Okay,
maybe some potential changes.
great.
Okay.
Be good.
Eugene, and then Amy was sort of waving maybe.
Yeah, I'll
Okay,
run it.
Eugene.
I'm curious, the $800,000 was only in the out-of-district?
Correct.
So we're saying that people who are living in rural areas out of district have to come up with the extra money, and the people who live in district take no hits because their budgets are smaller to begin with? I guess that confuses me.
Well, Kate, you might be a better person to respond to that than me. I don't want to misspeak.
I'm not quite sure I understand the question. Can you repeat the question?
Well, as I understood the question, is the $95,000 gap, first of all, there may not be a $95,000 gap if they can go back and rework this.
No, this is an income project.
But I think I understand Eugene is kind of wondering if the lack of enough funds in the out-of-district pot, which can't support all of these asks, makes it look like the out-of-district is gonna lose a potential service element, whereas the in-district is fully funded, it's gonna get all its wish list.
So, okay, I understand the question. So I think, so one of the things to think about is this in-district and out-of-district funding was generated by ODOT, and that's generated by where the tax revenues come from. And I think to Tom's point earlier, they have projects that they want to get funded. So this 100% list that you've seen presented from LTD was based on an old estimate for how much money would come in, but it didn't reach their entire wish list. So now that there's more funding generated based on the new estimates from December, LTD has a greater wish list that they would like to use their in-district funds for, because they have a big need here and that's where that money is generated. But
So I do have one question, I have Phil and then Kate, but what are the chances that we're gonna get another revenue projection anytime soon?
I think the December estimates were all you're gonna see.
Okay,
before you have to
thanks.
submit your step plan.
All right,
That would be
okay.
my guess.
So, Phil and then Kate.
Yeah, I just realized that I don't know the answer to this question. And it's a dumb question, but I'm going to ask it anyway. What is the situs of the payroll for the purpose of making these divisions? Is it the residence of the person who is the employee whose money is being taken, or is it the situs of the employer where the check is made? And the reason I ask the question, just so you understand, is that my belief is that most of the people in rural communities who have a job come into town to work. And so if it is based on the situs of the employer, then we are overestimating in-district and underestimating out-of-district payroll, just using that method. I don't know the answer to the question, that's why I ask it.
We have an expert here.
We have the answer.
Mark has the answer.
Pretending to be an expert. So it's a employee payroll tax. However, this sub-allocation formula is predicated on where the person is employed.
Right.
So they're looking at generation by employees at the place of employment.
Right, okay, so in that case, then my comment is, we're overestimating the collection from people who live inside the district and underestimating the money generated by people who live outside the district because some of those people work in the district. And in my legislative district, that was very common. People in the small towns came into the city to work.
Yeah.
It was the legislature's intent to do it that way.
Okay.
And it also.
I wasn't on that committee.
I believe that it also is expressed in the Rules Advisory Committee.
Okay.
I could share a little bit of data too about, and we could even look more in more detail. There are some data that could tell us this question more definitively, but I will say most of the employment from outlying cities around Eugene are coming into Eugene.
Right.
But remember, Florence and Oak Ridge are both an hour away.
Yep.
And there's not a lot of that going that way. And there are some people, for example, there are people going from Eugene out to, well, Veneta's in our district, so that's not a good example, but there's people going out of the metro area.
So the effect I'm thinking about is likely to be small.
I think
Okay.
I would agree with your perspective, mainly because I can't remember how long ago, but I used a software that identified what the commute pattern was for Cottage Grove and found out that only 6% of the people who lived in Cottage Grove actually worked in Cottage Grove. And it was phenomenal how far away people were commuting for a job. And so I wish I could remember what those segments were of how many went to the Eugene, Springfield metro area and so on. But it's very true that I would think, and when I'm driving reverse commute to Cottage Grove, I'm seeing headlights in a steady stream from Oak Ridge and Roseburg, so.
Yeah.
So we've got about 7 minutes left. Kate's comment, then I'll try and see if I can wrap us up a little bit.
Yeah, I just wanted to point out that in the in-district funding request, there is a transit demand plan for South Lane Wheels and Cottage Grove, and there's also a Florence to Eugene public transportation route by LCOG. So I just want to say that we are addressing some of those needs in the in-district funding places. And also, Carl got disconnected.
Oh.
Just FYI.
Okay, I thought I heard somebody drop off. So, what we've accomplished today is answered some important questions that came up at the last meeting. And we've come close to, I'd say, wrapping up the out-of-district questions. We're gonna get a presentation on a rework of, was it the Rhodey Express? And see if we can get closer on the numbers. And so for our next meeting, I would like us to nail down the priorities. Well, first of all, do we agree, we have agreed that these projects all warrant approval. The question is funding, and then will we have that problem resolved? And then Kate has reminded me that even if everything fits within the funding amounts, we're still asked to prioritize these projects. Now, I assume that we could accept the prioritization that's being proposed by the project folks, or we could modify those. Kate?
I just have a question, because I noticed Project 11 is in both in-district and out-of-district. Is there a way to move all of the project funding into in-district?
It's based on a proportion of
Tax.
service in the district.
Okay.
It's the,
So we can't move any of those funds outside of the district?
that one is the Florence to Eugene project, and we just did the total how much of it the cost is.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
Paul?
Well, it's all, again, it was based only on a rough estimate of the mileage. We could look further into ridership, population served, other things. It could be adjusted. I'm not saying that we're going to come up with an adjustment, but it could be.
Okay.
Tom?
And then kind of following that scheme of things, and as you noticed, AJ couldn't make it today, she's out sick, but when she and I talked about this issue, one of the things she mentioned was we have a Yachats to Florence, a Rhodey Express, a Florence to Eugene, and right now we've costed those out as if they're kind of independent, just operating by themselves, when in fact there might be some, I'm saying this without knowing for sure, but there might be some efficiencies gained if we looked at how they're operating as a system. And that would probably be actually before we cut it or scale back any service this way. That might be the first thing that we want to look at.
So you will look at that before February 5th. And it has to be early enough before that meeting that we can send it out to the committee. David?
I don't know the answer to this question. What happens if we decided we just didn't like a project? We had the money, we just don't like the project and don't want to fund it, and we don't spend all of our budget? What happens to the money we don't spend? Does that carry forward, or does it go somewhere else?
It carries forward if a project.
So it still stays in district?
Or if a project uses less funding than anticipated, then that project would still stay within the boundary, but you couldn't use that funding at all until 2021, or fiscal year 2021.
2020.
Or wait, hold on.
No, what he's saying is absolutely accurate. All I wanted to add was you could designate a reserve with that money, and then you could access it before the next biennium.
Oh.
That would be the strategic move.
And we do have that.
Yeah.
And who makes it?
So we would, my guess is the difference, assuming we funded all of the in-district funds and we still had $300,000 left over, we might want to allocate that for a reserve going forward.
We do have a reserve on the list.
And there's the 130%
Number
list too.
6.
I
mean, 5.
Which one's the reserve?
Project number 5?
Sustainable Services Reserve, got it, thank you. Thank you.
Okay, and then we'll also try to tackle the in-district next
Do you
week.
want me to wait for that, for
I'm
the
sorry.
increase? That'd be fine.
Yeah, I
I'm
think
okay, getting
we should.
accurate numbers works for me.
Yeah,
So I think for both, by the time I send out the packet, which is next Tuesday, when the packet will come out, then I'll try to make sure that all the providers have or at 100% list from all the providers based on the
Thanks.
feedback they've heard from you today. And then I'll also provide any additional.
and it
If
would,
you have any other questions, you can always email them to me, and I'll try to get them to the providers as quickly as possible.
is there anything else that we need to, Sherry?
Well, I was just gonna say, I think that consensus I've heard is that we're excited about all of these possibilities of expanding services and, to these outlying communities. So I appreciate that, look at how we can juggle the funds to make it all work, because I think would be my preference.
Thank you for that summary. That's what I've heard from the group. Kate?
Great job with your microphones.
That's directly from the microphone monitor.
Okay.
Anything else?
I wanted to dovetail on what Phil said about, we could focus on value and production and outcomes that seem higher and better. But my gut feeling is first time around, this is a lot of our constituencies experiencing this hit and wondering, what do I get out of it? And this is such a better way of, if everybody can get the peanut butter impact and experience, I think there'll be more buy-in.
Okay. I'm about ready to say adjourn unless somebody else is gonna wave their hand. Okay, thank you, everyone. This was a good meeting.
Peanut butter and
We're adjourned. Yeah, it was.